Giselle workshop. This is a new kind of workshop that I'm offering to kind of explain and explore some of the history of the ballets that we do, obviously, as dancers, but also to dive deeper into some of the symbolism, some of the storyline, and then some of the things that I think, like things that I've experienced as a dancer in working on these performances that I think can enhance young dancers' understanding of the choreography as we explore these performances. So, if you do have any questions as we're going along, feel free to drop them into the chat. I will take a couple of minutes at the end to answer any questions. But yeah, let's dive into it. So, Giselle came from the Romantic period. So there was a period in the mid 19th century where art was changing dramatically, and instead of it being very based around the royal courts and the dances and the art being based around this kind of idolization of the gods and the historical stories of the past, they became much more human based and dealing with the interactions that people would have and their kind of understanding of supernatural and the exploration of the supernatural. And this period, especially in ballet, really flourished in the early and mid 19th century. So the kind of the first romantic ballet that we all think of is the La Sylphide, right? With Marie Taglioni, her taking ballet onto point, the costumes changing from being full length dresses to having shorter, what we would now term to be romantic ballet tutus, showing off a little bit of the ankle, which again was would have been very controversial at the time. Showing so much leg as a lady. The costumes obviously became very flowing. There was a lot of light changes that started to be used in the theatrical production because they started to employ gas lighting in the way that they would light the stage. So that was a new kind of a technological development at the time that was helping a lot with the development of how to present ethereal movement. Ballerinas became the feature point. Okay, so instead of the more masculine driven performances of the past, ballet, the female figure in dance became the center point of the ballet. And point work then developed because they wanted to show off this ethereal, supernatural element to the female dancer. So, for example, in Sylphide, it would have been like the Sylph, and then now in Giselle, looking at the Willies, right? So the Willies being the girls who died before they were able to marry their betrothed. Love, betrayal, redemption, right? Like when we think of the Romantic period of art, that's really a big part of it. Anything revolving around storylines of two people coming together, some sort of betrayal, and then at the end of that storyline, there being either some sort of redemption or retribution, even for the betrayal that was caused. Ballet music started to be specifically composed for those ballets, as we'll talk about a little bit later. And then because of the necessity to be able to tell a better storyline, ballet d'art and the usage of stagecraft and pantomime became really big. So one of the things that we'll do towards the end of this workshop is I'll show you some videos as well of elements of Giselle where pantomime is used to tell the story. It went away from being court entertainment to being in theaters, right? It became a theatrical performance, and again using the ballet d'action where they were starting to tell more of a storyline through mime and through that what we now would use as like a mise en scene, where one person is using their hands to express a story and someone else uses their hands to respond. And even jokingly, where we talk about these days, there's one expression that everybody uses in ballet, which is those hands opening out into a question mark kind of position. The male dancer went from being kind of a focal point to being someone who would support the ballerina. And I remember being in a rehearsal in Vienna where they were talking about how the man almost became like the third leg for the ballerina, because now she was needing to do more things on point. The partnering was there to kind of hold her up and make it look like she was floating. And so the male dancer became integral as a point of stability for the female dancer to do much more technical performance-based work. So let's talk about the story of Giselle. Giselle is a young maiden. She's a young peasant girl, and she is welcomed out of her house one day unexpectedly by a knock at the door. Now, when she comes out, she doesn't see anybody, and she's kind of shocked to find no one there, because Albrecht, who is a duke, has come to the village, and Albrecht is not. He's not very honest. So he comes in and he kind of takes off his more royal clothing and he hides himself away as a peasant. He makes it look like he's a peasant. And so he has this kind of playful enticing of Giselle. And there's a moment where, as we'll talk about a little bit later, there's a moment where, he basically swears his love to her, and she says, "Now hold on a second. I need to know. Like, let's let this flower decide whether you love me or not." And so she's counting the flower petals, and she realizes that it says, "He loves me not." And in that moment, he pulls one of the extra petals off, shows her again, "Look, you miscounted." And then, it's like, "Oh, really? We are meant to be together." Hilarion is another character in the story who is actually in love with Giselle and is a huntsman. And he is a little bit unsure of what's going on between Albrecht and Giselle, and he loves Giselle, and so he kind of goes on this investigative process to figure out, is Albrecht actually who he says he is? What is he doing here? How did he get to this village? And so the hunting party, the royal hunting party, shows up in the village. Albrecht kind of hides away, and I think Hilarion figures out that maybe Albrecht is actually not who he says he is. He goes into another house where Albrecht has hidden his royal clothing and finds it. And then he confronts them on the situation. The hunting party comes back into the scene, and it turns out that Albrecht is actually betrothed to another woman by the name of Bathilda. And so this breaks Giselle's heart. Now, she already has a very weak heart because she was born that way. And this ends up throwing her into a fit of madness. There's a very famous dance called the Mad Scene. And Giselle ends up dying. Now, because Giselle dies before she was married, she gets transported to become a Willy. And in the second act, we see the Willies actually kill Hilarion. But the Willies are spirits who live in the forest, who basically force the men who come into the forest to dance until their death. And so in the second act, we see Hilarion come into the forest, the Willies dance him to death, and then Albrecht comes, but Giselle's love for Albrecht is strong enough to save him from the wrath of the Willies. And at the end of the ballet, Giselle goes back into her grave, and Albrecht is left to mourn her loss, having survived through the night. So we'll dive into a lot more of that symbolism, but that's just a basic overview of the story of Giselle. So we have the key characters. We've got Giselle, who's the peasant girl. We've got Albrecht, who is the duke. Hilarion, the gameskeeper. In some versions, he's also a huntsman. It really depends. In some versions, he brings flowers. In some versions, he brings like a hunt to Giselle. It really depends on the version. Bertha is Giselle's mother, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. Some of the kind of undertone storylines that are used in some versions that are not consistent in all versions, but one thing that we used to talk about in Vienna, which I found quite interesting. I'll touch on that in a minute. Bathilda is the princess that Albrecht is betrothed to, and Mirtha is the queen of the Willies. Now, let's talk about the history of this ballet, because it is fascinating to realize just how much history it actually has. So, choreographed by Jules Perrault and Jean Corali to the music of Adolphe Adam. Now, Adolphe Adam, if you didn't know, also composed "O Holy Night." So maybe go and listen to that at Christmas time and see if you can pick out some undertones that are very similar to some of the music from Giselle. Now, like we talked about earlier, the music of the ballet was composed specifically for the production. So they didn't just take any classical music and dance to it. It was actually composed, and they worked together with the choreographers to put these things together. The movements were quite simple that were used because they wanted to illustrate a flowing, ethereal nature to the dance. And so they used very basic things like ballonets and small jetés and things like that to illustrate the type of movement that fairies and Willys would have had. It originally premiered at the Ballet du Théâtre de l'Académie Royale de Musique, which would have been what would now be called the Paris Opera. So Carlotta Grisi was the original Giselle, and she actually was the only one to dance the role of Giselle from 1841 until 1849. So there was not another ballerina in Europe at the time that ended up dancing that role. Now, outside of Europe, there were dancers who traveled and brought the role to other locations, but in Paris, she was the only one who danced that role. She was originally from Croatia and then moved to Italy, was trained in Italy, and then danced with the Paris Opera, or what would become the Paris Opera Ballet. Her partner, interestingly, her partner is Albrecht, was the brother of Marius Petipa. So Lucien Petipa was the brother of Marius Petipa, and he was the original Albrecht. Now there is some interesting storyline with that, because when Giselle first came to Russia in 1851, it was performed basically the way that Jules Perrault and Jean Corelli choreographed it. But then over time, Marius Petipa made many changes to it, as he did with many ballets. So a lot of ballets are credited to Marius Petipa. While they may not have originally been choreographed by him, they did get adapted by him for the Mariinsky. First U.S. performance was in 1846 by the American ballerina Mary Ann Lee. So she actually came to Italy for a year and trained with Jean Corelli, and then basically took the ballet back to the United States. And the first performance of Giselle in the U.S. was in Boston after studying with Jean Corelli. It has since been performed around the world by hundreds of companies. It's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, romantic ballet, and it's done internationally. There have even been some contemporary adaptations, like the one by Akram Khan, which is very, very contemporary. It's not, you almost can't relate it back to the original romantic ballet, but it does run on the same storyline. And so when we think about romantic ballets, Giselle is definitely one of the ones that always comes up. Now, there is a style to this type of ballet that developed as a result of the costuming that was used. So, at the time, the romantic tutu would have been using a corset at the top and the long flowing, kind of almost silky romantic tutu that the women would have been using. So that costuming was designed specifically to create a certain ethereal look for the dancer. And I remember a costumer from my school when I was a student talking about the type of tool that they would use for the fabric for the skirts. And it had a certain weight to it that when the arm would brush the skirt would hang in the air for a second before it came back down. The tutu skirt would hang for a second before it came back down. And so I'm just going to stop the share for a second. I'm going to pull up talk about a little movement that we often see in the romantic ballet Giselle. So one of the things that is iconic of the Giselle ballet is this movement here. So as we step, she will often go something like this, and then run off. And that arabesque, that brushing of the arm across the skirt, that creates enough force for the skirt to rise at both ends. And then as she would move off, we almost have that phantasmagoric quality of a ghost moving through space, because the skirt would then slowly come back down as she ran off the stage. It created a certain ethereal appearance that is iconic for the ballet Giselle. And so that then combined with the corset, which caused the women to have to stand in this kind of over position like this, because standing upright would have caused them to not be able to breathe. This forward position combined with this kind of movement here, or this movement here, leads to the romantic style of ballet. And so I'll show you a video later of our performance in Vienna, but what you'll probably see is that over the top positioning is not necessarily present. And a lot of that has to do with the costuming changes that have happened over the centuries, that women no longer wear corsets. They're no longer feeling like they need to stand that way in order to be able to breathe. And the costuming has changed to the point where certain qualitative elements of the movement have developed to be more upright, more modern in taste than they would have been when they were originally performed. Just pull back up the presentation here. So let's talk about some of the symbolism in this ballet. One of the big things that I think is extremely important in Giselle is the flowers. Okay, so flowers from the very beginning of the ballet until the very end are present throughout. Hilarion brings a set of flowers to Giselle in the beginning to represent his youthful love for her. That flower is then picked from the basket that he brings to be used as a kind of playful game with Albrecht. He loves me not. There's a crown of flowers that's put onto Giselle's head. We see flowers throughout the first act, basically as this kind of playful, loving, almost endearing symbolism. And then in second act, it takes a much darker turn. So the wand that Mirtha uses, that imbues her with the power to control her willies, the queen of the willies, to control the other willies, it's almost always a branch of rosemary, and that rosemary has the meaning of memory and remembrance. So when she uses it to get Giselle to start dancing, or when she uses it to control the willies, what she's telling them is, remember what happened to you. Remember the pain and the anguish that you went through in dying before your wedding day, or in being betrayed by your loved one. And the lilies then that Albrecht brings, first of all, there's grief, right? Like he's feeling awful. So it shows a character arc for him, that he's gone from kind of this cad who's playing around and maybe not necessarily in love, but just looking for a good time, to someone who realizes what he's done and that he actually did love Giselle. So that represents a good character arc, which gives reason for Mirtha's rosemary to not work on Giselle when she's trying to get her to get Albrecht to dance to his death. The lilies also then symbolize death, right? Like there's some interpretations that say lilies symbolize death because they represent the moment when the soul departs the body. Now, there's a very interesting moment, which I will show you later, where at the end of the ballet, after Giselle has re-entered the grave, that Albrecht picks back up the flowers, and as he's walking away from the grave, the lilies are dropping in a line, and then he stops in the middle of the stage, having dropped all the lilies. So it's almost like his soul has been left behind at the grave of Giselle. Like he's a shell of a man, and that would then be that retribution that he's paid for the betrayal that he committed. The willies are a huge part of this ballet, and I think we expect the willies to be there, but we have to almost take it from a folkloric standpoint as to where these came from. They have shown up throughout history. Like, this is not something that's unique just to Giselle. There was a huge tradition of thinking of women who had died before their wedding as, potentially trying to harm the men who wronged them, right? Like that was something that happened a lot. And even willies are wiles, right? Like we talk about the feminine wiles even in society these days. That they're unable to rest in their graves because they were not able to satisfy their passion for dancing naked. Like this was something that was in the folklore at the time. They would gather at midnight to lure young men and dance them to their death. So throughout folklore history, especially in Eastern Europe, we see this symbol of a woman who is scorned by a former lover, who is then there to haunt and destroy him in the afterlife. And if we look at the origins of the story for Giselle, it comes from two passages. One from a poem about the willies, so specifically about these willies and what they would do to men, and then another about a young girl, which was written by Victor Hugo, in which this young girl had a desire to dance, and in her desire to dance, she danced all night, and in being exposed to the cold and the damp air, she becomes sick and dies. And so when you connect those two things as a storyline, it's a good inspiration to develop a storyline around a young girl who falls in love, who just wants to dance and enjoy life, who's then through that betrayal dragged into death, and then forced to make men dance until their death for all eternity. It's a very deep and touching storyline, but it's quite intense when you look at it from that perspective. Now, I did mention a little bit of a hidden storyline. One of the things that we used to talk about, and I don't know the origins of this, and I haven't ever heard it in another company, but I think obviously it has had some basis in how the character development has grown over the years within Giselle. So there was a story that they used to tell in Vienna with Bathilda's father, who was the head of the hunting party. And when he would come into the town, he had this kind of almost uncomfortable tension with Giselle's mother. Now, we know that Giselle has a heart issue, so there's already a character flaw embedded into her character. Now, we don't really know who Giselle's father is because he's not necessarily present in the storyline. And so the underlying story that they used to tell was that many, many years ago, before the events of Giselle, what happened was Bathilda's father came to the town and had an affair with Giselle's mother. And so there was this kind of secondary story that was told amongst the company members. And I don't think it was in any of the official storyline playbook or anything that was given to the audience. But it was something that we would use as a means of deepening the storyline that Giselle and Bathilde were actually half-sisters, and that was an even greater part of the betrayal and part of the reason why Giselle already had that character flaw, because she was an illegitimate child. I don't know of that being told anywhere else, but I thought it would be an interesting point of discussion because it does add a certain depth to the storyline. It does add an extra level of intrigue to the first act, and I thought it would be quite interesting to share with you guys. So pantomime, right? Like the pantomime in the first act, the majority of the pantomime is foreshadowing what's about to happen. So there's a moment in the first act where Giselle's mother enters the scene, and Giselle has been dancing the waltz with her friends. And Albrecht has been dancing along with them. And Albrecht goes over to the side and kind of hides himself for a moment when Giselle's mother enters. And Giselle's mother is very upset that Giselle has been almost reckless with her dancing because she's concerned that Giselle's heart and her heart issues will cause her to die and become a willy. And so she actually tells the myth of the willies in the first act as like a warning: be careful about what you choose, be careful about what you do, because you may end up cursed, basically. And then again, we talked about Mirtha's wand. There is a scene also where Albrecht enters and he's kind of forced to the ground by Mirtha. And Giselle steps in front to protect and use her love for Albrecht to protect him. And Mirtha tries to use her wand to get Albrecht to dance, but it doesn't work. And she tries again and it doesn't work. And she tries again and it doesn't work. And so we see the love that Giselle had was so pure that it was able to break the memory spell that Mirtha was trying to cast onto Giselle. So what I want to do is I would like to just kind of watch some scenes from Giselle and then talk about each of them. So let me just pull up the first one here. All right, just give me a second. All right, so this is the entrance of Hilarion into the ballet. Now, in this version, this was the beginning of the ballet. So just have a look. Okay, so in that section there, you can see, first of all, Hilarion coming in, putting the flowers down, and then you see Albrecht entering the space, and he hides away his sword, he hides away his royal clothing, and it's all put in a place where hopefully no one's going to find it. And then he decides that he's going to go and knock on Giselle's door, at which point Giselle enters the space. So the presentation of the flowers already bookending, right? Like we've got this presentation of the flowers at the beginning of the ballet, and then flowers at the end of the ballet, which we'll show shortly. That it really nicely bookends the symbolism of flowers within the ballet and how that all comes together. So on top of that, we then have the knock at the door, right? This knock at the door is consistent throughout the entire first act. We see it there. We'll see it again later on with Bathilde's father. He knocks at the door. So it's almost like men knocking at the door to welcome the women out is a big part of how this ballet presents itself. Now let's fast forward a little bit, and I will pull up the flower picking So let me just share this. So Giselle has just picked the flower and she's saying, he loves me not. And then she counts the petals on the flower and she realizes that it'll mean that he doesn't love her. Now Albrecht is tricky and he pulls one of the petals off, runs over and says, look. Okay. So already there now again we're seeing the flowers being used as a means to tell the storyline, right? Like the flower is there to help convince Giselle that Albrecht really is her true love and that she should throw all caution to the wind and everything will be fine. And then they continue on with this dance where it's almost iconic within the ballet, and you see these ballets that they're doing. Hilarion has just spotted them and he's not happy about it. It's the first time he realizes that potentially Giselle has found someone that isn't him. So Hilarion is questioning, what are you doing, kissing this other guy? Who is he? And he basically, I love you. Like, what's going on here? And she's not certain of what to do. She tells him she doesn't love him. Albrecht tries to stop him. Now, in this scene here, unfortunately, Hilarion dropped his sword. So look, sometimes things happen in productions that don't go the right way. What normally would have happened there is Hilarion would have grabbed his knife, his dagger, and come at Albrecht, and Albrecht would have reached for his sword. Okay, now this is a very telling moment because what happens is Hilarion takes it and says, "Oh, why would this peasant have a sword? It doesn't make any sense." Now, at the same time, Albrecht has enough presence that he's able to walk him back. But the fact that Albrecht almost betrayed his disguise led to Hilarion questioning a little bit more about who he is and what he's doing there. So we then will fast forward a little bit to when the mother comes in, because I want to illustrate how the pantomime of the mother foreshadows the death of Giselle. So she can tell that Giselle is a bit sweaty and has obviously been exerting herself and welcoming, showing her friends and also Albrecht, and that they've been dancing. And now we see the pantomime. Basically, that dancing will cause you to die. Okay, so she's basically just come out and said, look, if you die before you've been married and found your true love and everything has gone right for you, then you're basically going to dance, you're going to die, and then you'll be cursed to become a Willy and dance until your death. And it's a warning to all of the young maidens in the village that don't make a silly mistake. Make sure that you get married and live the correct life, right? So that sequence there is important because it's basically setting up for what is about to happen. And if you look at any traditionally put together production, you'll notice that there's a lot of foreshadowing that happens. There's a lot of setup for the later events of the storyline to establish exactly what the next symbolic event is going to be. So now we'll fast forward a little bit to when the hunting party arrives. And actually, I want to go to, we'll go to where they arrive, mainly because I want you to see, first of all, the knocking on the door. Okay, so again, knocking on the door, getting the feminine element of Giselle's family to come out and to be welcomed. And then I want to show the ending where Bathilde's father actually goes into the house and spends time with Giselle's mother while the rest of the hunting party leaves. So we'll just do this. So there you can see walking across the stage now, that is Bathilde's father. And then in comes Bathilde. Now just quickly, as you can see, Bathilde is in this bright red coloring that for this version, obviously they chose a very muted, almost black and white-esque coloring for the ballet. Now that's not necessarily consistent with most Giselle productions. Generally speaking, Giselle productions are very colorful in the first act and very black and white in the second act. What I think the coloring does well here, though, is it shows a clear dichotomy between Bathilde and Giselle, that Giselle is very blue and Bathilde is very red, right? So we see these kind of opposites working already at play here. So again, knocking at the door. And I don't know if you noticed it, but down here in the corner, he has a moment where he's like, oh, is that who I think it is, right? So let me just take it back a little bit and maybe you'll see it again. So just pay attention to this bottom right corner of the screen as she comes out. So it's almost hinting at a prior relationship between Bathilde's father and Giselle's mother, which would explain the birth of Giselle. So now if we go forward a little bit more to when the hunting party leaves, or is about to leave. They all go to spend time together in the house, and the hunting party is gone. Now, at this point, in the ballet. What tends to happen is that Hilarion comes in, he ends up finding the clothing from Albrecht. He also finds the horn. And so what I want to jump to now before we get too far into it is I want to just jump to this solo of Giselle, because I think it's important. This solo, while it is so commonly done in competitions and as a repertory piece, has so much symbolism to it that I'm going to break it down a little bit for you. So it's not perfectly what I would like to see necessarily from the solo in this interpretation, but I do want to talk about some of the elements to it here. So just give me a second. And I'll share this with you. So just before this, Giselle has basically begged her mother to let her dance, and her mother has said, okay. Now, if you look at this stage, you have her mother on one side of the stage, and you have Albrecht on the other side of the stage, and they both represent a different type of love for Giselle. Now, Albrecht's love is going to be more playful and almost cad-like, and her mother's love is going to be much more protective and caring. And so as we go through this solo, I want you to watch and see how Giselle plays off of both sides, and how throughout this solo, it's almost like there's a tug of war between the power of Albrecht's love and the power of her mother's love. Okay, so if we look at the structure of that solo, it starts out and she goes to one side and then she goes to the other. So she's presenting to both sides. Then, generally speaking, so in this version, she does the arabesque to one side, but in many versions, what will happen is she'll do that first piqué arabesque, and then the second time she'll do the piqué arabesque to the other side. So it's almost like she's bowing to both sides. We're showing reverence to both her mother's love and then also Albrecht's love. Then she's got the pirouettes in attitude from the corner where it's almost a bit flirtatious. So she's kind of flirting with Albrecht and having that almost playful relationship, which is kind of making her spin, right? Like you think that kind of love is not going to be very stable, but it's going to create that feeling of uncertainty, that feeling of, I'm on cloud nine, kind of floating on air, right? So that turning element there leads her into the en dedans pirouette, en dehors pirouette to the knee, and then going in the opposite direction. So she's being spun towards her mother, and then she's being spun back towards Albrecht, which then takes her into the hops, and the hops go towards one side and then back to the other, and then to the one side and then to the other. And she's presenting to both sides, which then leads her into that manège around, finishing down to the ground, which is again almost a bit of a foreshadowing of her death later on. Okay, so the deep symbolism here is that she's being torn in two directions by the love for her mother and the love for Albrecht. And what we know because of the foreshadowing that's come before is that that love for Albrecht will eventually pull her to her death. No matter how much her mother has tried to protect her and keep her from this pain, she will eventually be driven to become mad and die. And that is part of the betrayal, right? Like the betrayal later on, we see that Hilarion comes back in, he blows the horn, Bathilde shows up, and Albrecht, by his royal duties, is expected to kiss Bathilde's hand, which he does. That sends Giselle into a fit of madness, and then because her heart is too weak to take it, she ends up dying. Now, I do want to show a couple of scenes from the second act because I think the continued symbolism throughout, like if we see the awake. Oh, actually, let's do Albrecht's entrance because I think this is really important as far as the flowers are concerned. Like he comes in walking with this massive bouquet of lilies, and that is first of all representative of his grief. It's representative of the pure love that he actually had for Giselle, and it's part of the reason why Mirtha's magic doesn't end up working on him. So this is second act now. Okay, so now obviously Albrecht has thought that he's heard something or seen something, and he's not sure what it is. There's that kind of ethereal nature that comes from Giselle entering into the space, and you hear that change in the music from being very somber to him thinking about everything that he did wrong to now, oh, what did I see? What is going on, right? So he's being pulled back into reality. We then see later on when he's had a little bit of an interaction with Giselle and he comes into the forest with the Willies that that has led to the magic not working. So let's have a look at that. Okay. So in that case there, you can see, Giselle's love is strong enough that it has stopped the magic of the rosemary from being able to control Albrecht to have to dance to his death. Now it still happens. Like they still force him to dance, and he dances and he dances and he dances and he dances. It's one of the hardest acts for a male dancer because he just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. You think you're done, and then you got to get back up again and do more cabrioles and whatnot. What I do want to finish up with is just this last scene that is so powerful because of how it connects the Lilies between them. It's like almost like their souls are connected in the end. And even though Giselle has died and Albrecht is still alive, the string of lilies that get left behind is the connection between him in the corporeal world and Giselle in the ethereal world. So let's just watch that, and then we can ask any questions that you might have. Okay, and so you can see how that string of lilies, while Giselle was still able to hand him one, it brought him connection between the two of them, and then it's almost like their souls are eternally tied together by that string of their souls across the floor between Albrecht and Giselle, ending with him being forced to live out the rest of his life to know what he did, but then also Giselle being forced to dance men to her death as a Willy for the rest of eternity. So neither of them really end with a happy ending, but it does have this connection between the two of them, showing that they were entwined and that it was true love, right? And those flowers do represent that love and purity, but also grief and disparity. So it's a beautiful symbolic tie together between the first flowers at the beginning of the ballet being used to determine their love for each other, to then the flowers at the end tying it all together. So I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, I mean, obviously we can go much longer and much more in depth on a lot of this stuff, but I will be sharing the recording with you guys as well. So if anyone does have any questions, if you do have any questions, Ruby, or if there's anyone else that does have questions that didn't make it to the live but would like to send me an email or a message, feel free to do that as well once you watch the recording. Did you have any questions, Ruby, about anything I talked about? Feel free to drop them in the chat if you don't want to take yourself off mute. If not, just let me know if there's no questions. Okay, all right, all good. So thank you anyway for jumping in, for joining me today on this little exploration through Giselle, and I will upload this recording and send it out to everybody, and hope to see you in a future workshop. Thank you so much.